the great pleasure of introducing Zsuzsanna Balogh-Brunstad. She has been so great during this whole kind of stepping up and being a host for this, and really helpful in helping us kind of guide what these network chats look like. So I really appreciate that. She's an associate professor of geology and has taught at Hartwick since 2008. She received her bachelor's degree in mathematics and education and a master's in geography and education from the Science University of Pécs in Hungary, and her doctorate in geology from Washington State University. Her current research focuses on two main areas: investigation of microbe, fungi, and mineral interactions in the root zone of vascular plants, and watershed hydrobiogeochemistry. She is a frequent recipient of faculty research grants, including this summer, and the Milne Fund Awards. In 2015, she was the recipient of Hartwick Teacher Scholar Award. No surprise there. I thank you for hosting, and you're all in for a great treat, so thank you. Professor.
Thank you, Susan, for the introduction. And I also welcome everybody for today's network chat, which is the last one in June, but you should stay tuned for the fall, where we're going to continue these meetings and chats. So with that, I would like to introduce today's participants, and I'm going to start with Nicole Mehr, who graduated from Hartwick in 2017 as a geology major with a minor in environmental science and policy. And now she's a hydrogeologist at a water resources consulting firm in Washington State, specializing in groundwater resources. She identifies optimal sites for installed wells, analyzes movement and quality of groundwater, estimate aquifer properties, predict how pumping will impact nearby streams. She also works on active and abandoned contaminated sites where contamination has migrated into the groundwater and needs to be remediated. So, and then she lives in Washington, obviously. And our second speaker is Emily Wild, who graduated from Hartwick College in 1995, also as a geology major. And now she is the Chemistry, Geosciences, and Environmental Studies Librarian for the Princeton University Library. And previous to that, between 1996 and 2018, she was also a hydrologist and a librarian, a physical scientist at the US Geological Survey. And Emily's scholarly interests now include library instruction, reference, citation, and data management, raw and geospatial data sets, and physical and laboratory sampling methods. And our third speaker is Katrin Winters, who graduated from Hartwick in 2014 as an environmental chemistry major with a minor in environmental science and policy. And now she works at an I know that I'm going to tumble on this, an environmental analyst for New Pick, and acting in a role of permit writer as a contractor for New York State DEC. And she processes application, analyze data, and apply regulations to write and update wastewater permits with the state pollutant discharge elimination systems. So welcome all three of you. And we're going to start out with basically your pathways, how you got from Hartwick to your current position. And I'm going to start with Nicole.
So my path was pretty straightforward. It's not too interesting. But while I was at Hartwick, I knew I wanted to go to graduate school, and I wanted to go to a water resources program. I wanted to do any research related to water. So while I was at Hartwick, I started contacting professors at various different graduate schools across the country, looking for a potential advisor who had funding so that I could get a research assistantship, which is something, if anyone on here is looking to go to graduate school, that's definitely the key, because your tuition is paid for and you get paid to do research. So I went to Oregon State University, so I moved out to Oregon. My master's took about like a year and a half, and our program there in the water department, they sort of sent out emails like every week or so with jobs for, you know, any scientist or engineer or anyone in policy, all water related. And I just happened to find the, you know, the job I have right now was in that email, and I applied and got it and moved to Seattle. So straightforward.
Thank you. What about you, Catherine?
So I did research with Dr. Z, my senior year, actually my junior and senior year at Hartwick in stream chemistry. So I also got a passion for water. And but my senior year, I really wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I was mostly focusing on jobs, chemistry jobs, as well as a lot of environmental education and sustainability jobs, because I have a lot of interest in the environmental field. But Z convinced me to also apply to grad schools. And so I'm really glad that she did, because I ended up going to the University of Delaware, and I have a master's in water science and policy. And at UD, I got a lot of experience, more experience with field work, really learned how to research, and I became our lab director since I had the chemistry background. So I was training undergrad students in chemical analysis. And if I hadn't gone to grad school, I never would have gotten my job at EPA. So after grad school, I was the metals chemist at EPA for 2 years. And all of that experience I got in grad school really helped me do well with the interview and then actually with the job as well. But that was in New Jersey, and I missed upstate New York. I missed being near my family. So about 2 years ago, I moved back to the Albany area, and I'm a contractor with New EPIC, which is the New England Interstate Water Pollution Control Commission. They're a really great organization. So if you're interested in water in any way, they have jobs in all the New England states and New York. And so I'm a contractor at New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, or DEC. And I write wastewater permits, or SPEEDIES permits. And it's really different than anything I've done. It's different than fieldwork. It's different than chemistry. But there's a lot of data analysis, which I enjoy. There's a lot of really digging into the puzzle of what's happened with this permit in the past. What does the permittee want to change at their facility? And then applying what their data shows and water quality standards from regulations to make sure that the permit is protective of water quality. So it's really satisfying, and I really enjoy the puzzle to it.
Good. That's interesting. Thank you, Catherine. So what about you, Emily? Well, you're still muted. Yeah, okay, good.
Sorry. Yeah, so I have a very untraditional path that students love to hear about, and so I love to share it. And so I basically, most recently, I described myself as I went to a liberal arts college and now work at a liberal arts university. And I had a 23-year side trip at the US Geological Survey. And they get a kick out of that. They're like, what? And so I went to Hartwick actually as a math major, and then was recruited to the geology department by the geology faculty, because my strong suit was, or two of my interests in strong disciplines were mathematics and chemistry. And so they showed me how chemistry and mathematics were used in geology. And the hook for me was, they said that on Tuesdays and Thursdays, that at Hartwick, we could go hiking to learn about the rocks. And I was like, hiking on Tuesdays and Thursdays? I said, please sign me up. And so I switched majors, and I had been a math tutor. And so then I worked for the geology department as a TA in mineralogy, and then as a research assistant to the faculty. And so part of that was we would go to the library a lot and use GeoRef. And I got to know the librarians in the library, and I ended up staying at Hartwick after graduating. I'm one of the few people that just stayed and worked in the library, and I really enjoyed it. I learned how to use all the different databases for all the disciplines, and then I showed the reference librarian there how to use how I use GeoRef and other geology resources through what I was taught by the faculty at the time. And so she also told me how I should become a librarian, and it would, because my skill set with geology and my interest in doing research, she could see that that was something I excelled at. And I had done an environmental law internship at the New York State DEC for the regional attorney between my junior and senior year. And so I learned how to use the law databases through that. And so when I graduated, I I think it was 5 months after I graduated, after working at the library at Hartwick, I got a job at the U.S. Geological Survey as a hydrologist. And I'm one of the few hydrologists that got a master's in librarianship and then stayed professionally as a hydrologist for a long time until a job opened up out in Denver. And so I became a librarian and physical scientist in the Denver USGS library. Mm-hmm. And so it was it's not necessarily a traditional path. It was opportunities happened, and my interest in those jobs was just incredible. And I love talking to people about what they did and how I could apply the geology job into something not as traditional as just getting a PhD in geology or working in different sectors. And so I chose the librarianship field to utilize my geology degree, and I love it. And then in 2018, a position opened up at Princeton University Library, and I was really excited to come back to the East because I really like green and water, and I miss the ocean a lot. And so I was excited to come back to the East, and I love living here in New Jersey.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that's definitely interesting. And as you said, it's very important to take those opportunities what's coming in your way that might, change your pathway a little bit, but have to be open to that, definitely. All right, so my next question is, how has this pandemic impacted your work? And do you see some of the adjustment being made becoming standard practices? So actually, let's start with Emily this time. So going backwards.
Okay, so it's been interesting. I've been home since March 13th and helping students and faculty and researchers from around the country and the world find and use any materials related to chemistry and geosciences and environmental studies. And the biggest challenge since this happened was some items are print only. And so if I happen to have something here in my personal library, I would scan it and send it to them. But maintaining the geology collection online and purchasing more content electronically, and our library is wonderful in the sense that if we needed something, I could order it and it could be available to the students and faculty the same day in many cases. And so, but it's been challenging, but luckily there's a lot of library sources that opened up and became online. So for chemistry, for example, a lot of the publishers and the database providers opened up everything to the world up until like June or September, depending on the publisher. And so it became it's almost like, to some students, there was almost too much information that became available. Mm-hmm. So, and then one aspect that was great was a lot of students and faculty are interested in climate change. And basically the earth took a break and so many people were home that there was so much climate data, and the shift in climate data and water quality, air quality, etc. So.
Yeah. So do you think some of these, adjustments what you guys made, like it's going to stay for longer periods? So like more just, shifting to the online resources?
Yeah, I'm doing more webinars and I'm creating more online educational content for how to use the resources and making that available more often. And so, yes, I do think that going into the fall semester, and especially this summer when they're doing a lot of research for their junior, at Princeton, they do junior papers and then senior theses. Mm-hmm. And so, so a lot of the incoming juniors are spending more time with that aspect of research. I'm planning on doing more video recordings so that they can just play a video that I created about how to use the different sources available to them.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So as I was saying, going backwards, so next is Katrin.
So for me, all that really changed was on March 17th, I started working from home. At first it was stressful because I was trying to balance like understanding what was going on with the pandemic and getting used to the new routine. But I think it took me about 2 or 3 weeks and I had a pretty good setup. I made a makeshift standing desk with my ironing board and a bookshelf. So that was nice. And then when it seemed like we were really going to be home for a long time, my dad was really great and made a stand for a monitor that we had just kind of sitting in storage because my boyfriend's a gamer and luckily we had an extra monitor. So because for me, it's really important to have ergonomics when I'm working. So the real big change for me was just starting to work from home because all my stuff, the hardest part is with our permits, some of our records are still hard copy, but luckily I was working on a couple permits right when we got the notification, like you're not gonna be able to come in tomorrow. And I just grabbed all the folders I could. So I have like 3 bags full of folders with the hard copy files, but that got me through most of the time. And then nice thing is I'm digitizing a lot of it when I go back into the office this week. So I've got it all ready to go. But all of our resources are online, our reference guides, our regulations, and all the work is done on the computer. So we're lucky enough to have a VPN where I can log into like my work desktop from home and have access to programs. But most of it's done in Excel and Word. And then really it's just nice to have access to like Google Earth Pro when I'm doing analyses of sites. And for as long as for long-term changes, I don't know how it's going to be right now. We're still in our phased reopening. Most of our staff have been able to work from home or are going to continue to do so while the pandemic is prevalent. My hope is that this will create more flexibility in the future when the pandemic is over to have a more permanent teleworking program in place and flexibility with hours, since we've really had to become flexible with people having childcare issues during the day and working split shifts and changing their hours based on that and working from home. But I know our executive staff at DEC have been very impressed with people's ability to work from home. So most people have been working from home. We do have some field staff, and I know that they've been able to start going back. There was a big push to make sure the health and safety plan was updated, and so those staff have to use separate vehicles and have to use proper PPE when they're out in the field. But I know that some field functions have been able to continue now that we've been able to put some protocols in place. So I'm not sure how that will affect field work in the long run. But for office-based work, it's been really nice to work from home, and I hope that it will allow flexibility in the future.
Thanks. So, Nicole?
So,
What about you?
yeah, well, in consulting, I mean, usually there's a split between office work and field work. And when, quarantine first started for, I guess, like the first month and a half, all field work stopped at my company. And I know this was true for other consulting firms in the Seattle area. So everyone was working from home and everyone was just doing office tasks on their computers. But Seattle entered in like the next phase, like June 1st, and that allowed for field work. And there was a huge push to get all the field work done that, we were, a month behind. So I've been out in the field pretty much every day so far in June, and everyone else in my company has been out as well, even those who usually don't spend much time in the field. So we have had a lot of work. The projects aren't stopping despite COVID-19. Like Catherine said, we're taking precautions and things are taking longer to finish just because you have to maintain 6 feet distance away from one another. So things are a bit slower, but still plenty of work. So yeah, we're gonna keep having more work, at least at my company. Our clients, so with my consulting firm, we're really small. And a lot of the time we work with like water districts. So small, like, cities of suburbs of Seattle may have their own water supply, and they might hire us to sort of help them with problems that they might be having or help manage their groundwater wells. And since, they do have part of the city's budget, and, COVID-19 really is taking large chunks of, it's diverting money away from, groundwater water work. So we have had a few clients that have said, oh, let's push back this project that we were going to start, this year in 2020, let's not discuss that until, you know, the end of 2021. Or they'd say, okay, we have this project that we usually want to finish in a year. Let's take 2 or 3 years to finish it.
Mhm.
So we have had a few clients that are like that, and that makes sense. But generally, it's not going to be a huge hit for my company. We still have a lot of environmental work, so things still need to get cleaned up. So I think the consulting field will be fine despite COVID when it comes to jobs. People are still hiring, so
Yeah. So do you actually have to travel away from Seattle, or mostly working in the Seattle area?
Yeah, I travel away from Seattle. If a place is like an hour and a half or 2 hours away, typically we would have stayed in a hotel if it was like, you know, 3 days of field work. Now we're just driving back and forth to the site, but we get paid to drive, so it's not that bad. But I do have one site in Eastern Washington that's 3 hours away. You can't drive there back and forth after working like 12-hour days. So we are in a hotel there, but we have a setup with the hotel where no one stays in the room like, you know, 3 days before, and they have their own cleaning practices. So it's all been vetted, and it's just something we have to do.
Cool, that's interesting. So let's actually talk a little bit more about your time at Hartwick, I guess. And so the next question would be, knowing what you know now, what advice would you give yourself while a student at Hartwick? And has this advice shifted since we got into the pandemic? And let's start in the middle, Katrin.
So the advice I would give myself is to be open to opportunities, especially in the environmental field. I think that Emily's story kind of showed this very well as mine, that your path can be kind of whatever you want it to be, and it could even be what you don't expect it to be. Like I said, I wasn't really planning on applying to grad schools, but that's where I ended up, and that's how I got my first professional job, and I loved my first job. And I never would have gotten there if I hadn't been open to applying to grad schools. And even being a permit writer, I never saw myself being a permit writer. I don't even think I really knew that was an option. But when I was starting to kind of look at the area to move back home, and it kind of popped up, and I was like, that could be cool. Let me find out what that is. And I'm loving it. We just had a retirement party for someone who did that for his entire career. And I could honestly see myself doing that because it's just very interesting. And I never thought that was going to be my career path. So just be open to opportunities. And I think that COVID-19 has actually really strengthened that advice, because right now the environmental field is doing well, but maybe the certain path that you're interested in is getting flooded with people because they may have lost their job in something similar. And so don't be afraid to try something that you weren't necessarily interested in, because you could end up with a really great opportunity.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. What about you, Nicole?
I would probably say, if you can, if your schedule is flexible, try and take some classes that are outside of your major. I know that was something that I started to do at the end of my time at Hartwick, probably like my senior year. I took differential equations, which is not a geology requirement whatsoever, but I have to say that one class has gotten me into, that's why my advisor accepted me at Oregon State University, because I was the only non-engineering student he's ever taken on, and he's an old guy. So he's had a lot of students, but he thought it was really, really peculiar that a geology student would take differential equations and other classes. And it's also helped me a lot in my job too. I don't know, I'm just using that class as an example, but there's, you take other chemistry classes, policy classes. It's a liberal arts school, so you got so many different options, and you never know which class is actually going to help you out in your future job. Like Catherine said, you don't know where you're going to end up, so it's best to try and make yourself be really well-rounded on your resume or your CV. And one way you can do that is with classes.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, that's a good advice. What about you, Emily?
I would definitely say do what you're interested in and not necessarily what you're good at, and definitely make sure to take in the advice from the faculty that are trying to help you. Because my senior year, I wanted to, for J term, I wanted to take ceramics. And they were like, no, we don't think that's a good idea. We think you should take microscopy. And I was like, why? And they said, because it would help your senior project and on diatoms. And I was like, okay, I'll do it, but I'd rather be taking this ceramics class at the down in the art building. And then I started to like it, and I developed photographs based on the imagery, and I started to run the scanning electron microscope myself. And that's one of the experiences that, and then with my what I ended up doing for my senior project was analyzing the diatoms in the lake water out at Pine Lake. And that was one of the stepping stones that helped me get every job I've ever had. And so it always came up in my job interview, like, you ran the scanning electron microscope yourself? And I was like, yeah, I took a class in it, and they let me do it at Hartwick. And so that independence for scientific research that they give you at such a young age somebody told me when they were reviewing my job application that it bumped me up significantly because I had done my own senior project and I ran the scanning electron microscope, which I didn't know that was significant at the time. And so, yeah, just taking advantage of all the different opportunities, and also the independent studies, working with faculty and alumni that have been out in the workforce. When I did the independent study at DEC, I worked for a Hartwick alum. And I think there's a lot of networks out there that exist that may not be apparent when you're focused on your studies at Hartwick and then other activities going on.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So I was looking at time, so I think I'm going to ask my last question, and then after that we're going to open it up to the audience. Okay, so basically all of you were pretty active in a lot of things when you were at Hartwick. So my question would be, like, how did you balance all of those activities and then keep yourself on track and insane where you're at Hartwick College? So let's start with Nicole.
Well, I mean, as a personal trait, I guess I'm definitely not a procrastinator. So I would start things as soon as I got them. So I don't know, I just had to do that just so I would make time for other extracurricular activities later on. But I know a lot of people aren't like that. I guess also, I was never afraid to ask for help at Hartwick, which I'm sure Z knows. I was in her office a lot, as with all other faculty. I always went to the office hours, and if there was a TA for a class and I had any questions, I'd always go to them. It was great just to stay on top of things, and it helped me work more efficiently. If I could get my questions answered faster, then I could finish everything quicker and keep moving forward. But yeah, I didn't play a sport at Hartwick or anything else. So I know other people may have better advice with balancing, lots of different things going on while at Hartwick.
Okay, thank you. What about you, Katrin?
So I'm a lot like Nicole, that I'm a big nerd. I love school. And while I was in college, I was like, I wish I could get paid to do this for the rest of my life. So I definitely prioritize my schoolwork as well. But I was a Blue Key tour guide. I was in Chem Club. So I did have other activities, and I also like to socialize. I loved going to events on campus. My roommate and I always went to fun events. But for me, I think the way that I was able to balance everything was to have a routine, have a schedule. So like from 8 to 5, I'd be working, and then we'd go to dinner. I'd make sure dinner was a social event, so I always could get some socialization. And then I still studied in the evening, and had like set time that I'd study before I did the fun stuff, and that's just what worked for me. And since I know we're going to skip the last question and we're short on time, I did want to touch on it. It talked about your most memorable moment at Hartwick, and I wanted to touch on it because Emily made a similar point with the alumni connections, because the thing that sticks out to the most to me from when I was at Hartwick was doing the link programs, which I know don't exist anymore, but there were job shadowing programs with Passage. And I'm not even sure if it's called Passage anymore, but the Career Center. Make those alumni connections. I still talk to my alumni mentor, and I know Nicole does too, because we both are friends with Mike Doherty. We both shadowed with him, and he's been a great connection. I also feel like those programs really helped me get a sense of all the different things I could do in the environmental field. And I had an internship in Boston between my junior and senior year, and I was nervous about living on my own so far away from home for the first time. So my roommate and I, my college roommate and I, went to Boston for a day. I went to Hartwick alumni event for Boston alumni so I could meet some people in the area and feel better about living in this big city by myself. So really utilize those alumni connections. And for those of you on the call today, the three of us, we really do want to connect with you. So if any of us are in a path that you're potentially interested in, please do let Susan know so you can reach out to us. With that, I'll let Emily answer Z's question.
Yeah, I had an interesting experience because when I was a freshman, I was only 17 when I started at Hartwick, and my sister was a senior. And so the first week of school, my sister came up to my dorm room and said, let's go out for coffee or tea or whatever it was at the time. And she worked through my schedule. I showed her my schedule and she said, I want you to meet with this person. I want you to do this. And she basically showed me everything that she wished that she had someone say to her when she was a freshman or a first year student. And so I worked through all of that, and she introduced me to the people that could help me for career services, the independent study program. And so that first week was a little overwhelming, but it was the best thing. And she made sure that I kept to my schedule. So she would come to the library and check on me to make sure that I was there during my library hours. And she would tell mom if I wasn't. And so there was that family connection there. And the other side is she also made sure that I had enough sleep. So she would come up to my dorm room and she would say, can I borrow your bike? And by the way, you should really start thinking about getting to sleep because you have to get up early tomorrow. And so having that, or just having somebody helping you that first year, it actually helped me stick to a schedule where every morning, my sophomore, junior, and senior year, I had a healthy breakfast, I would go for a run, and that type of scheduling.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's great advice from everybody. So thank you for that. We do have a question from the audience. So given the forcing people off the roads and out of the cities seems to have improved air quality since COVID-19 and perhaps other aspects of the environment, to what extent should government, NGOs, businesses, and colleges, universities try to maintain their virtual work, learning, regulation activities once this pandemic ends? What are your thoughts on kind of going in the same direction? How about,
any of you can start? You want to start first?
It's not necessarily my area of expertise, but I think that it proved that with thoughtful changes, we can make a difference. I think DEC is considering doing teleworking more for the sustainability aspect. But I was recently actually on a webinar with Leah Stokes. And so for anyone who wants to learn more, I think she's written some books about changing policy to really encourage sustainable development, clean energy. And in the webinar, I think she talked about how our existing petroleum-based energy is actually more expensive. It definitely impacts minority communities more. And so there's a whole conversation you could have there. I think there could be a whole separate alumni panel to really talk about some of those opportunities, but that's a good question.
Great.
Zsuzsanna, I don't have a question, but a comment. Catherine, you mentioned, and Nicole, you would have stayed in touch with Mike Doherty, who's the immediate past chair of our Alumni Relations Board and a terrific alumni leader. We are bringing back the former Metrolink, and so in the spring of 21, it's been rebranded to be called the Hawk Career Hop. So that stands for Hawk Overnight Program, the HOP. And we'll be going out to metropolitan areas and for students of all majors. So we'll be looking for folks like you to connect our young students with and be able to have them job shadow and network. So when they do graduate, they already know, as you said, members of the alumni and begin their network while they're still on campus. So excited to bring that back this year.
I'm really happy to hear that. Those programs, I think, were really amazing. And my boyfriend actually went to a large university, and I've brought him back for alumni weekend twice, and he's always amazed by the community that we have and by the connections you can make. And he's always like, I really wish I hadn't gone to a big school, because he was left in the dirt. Like, they were like, man, we're not going to give you credit for your internship. So the company was like, we're not going to give you an internship then if you're not getting credit. So he felt like he really missed out, and he sees all the opportunities that Hartwick offered, and I'm very grateful for it. So
yeah, the real world hands-on experiences of internships or fellowships or undergraduate research, or the clinical rotations our nurses do, student teaching, all that's so important and part of the core of Hartwick, and will continue to be so. So I'm excited to hear that it worked for you and it had such a positive impact for you.
great.
Yeah. Thank you. I think Michael raised his hand, so he probably have a question. I don't know, Susan, if you'll see that.
Yep, that's the question that I just asked.
Okay.
About what are your thoughts on, the pandemic has had a huge impact on the environment, with less people going to work, and less pollution. What are your thoughts long term? Does anybody want to tackle that question? Nicole or Emily?
I mean, I work for a really small company. There's like 20 of us, and probably 4 out of those people already work from home remotely. So they live 4 hours away from the Seattle area, and they just had their own home offices set up in their own homes. So we were kind of used to already communicating virtually or over the phone with at least those 4 people. So I could definitely see the majority of people at my company just deciding to work from home for probably the next year. At least we'll be given that option. I know some people with kids and don't have good work environments at home, they will be given priority to come into the office. I volunteered to stay home for as long as I need to allow my office mate to, because I share an office, a small closed office space with someone else who really needs to have that space at the office to get work done. So he's going to be there. I'll be working from home. Yeah, I think my company is really flexible with work from home, and they're trying to accommodate everyone. So I can only say about my small company.
Mm-hmm. So Emily?
So from a library standpoint, I think that there's going to be more scientific materials available online, and we're scanning projects of older scientific materials, and especially in the geosciences and environmental studies, because anything that's available physical, it's so hard the transportation at this point and the access it's just so much easier to scan it and make available online. And so we're already starting to see within the disciplines of geosciences and environmental studies a surge of new online content it's new, but it's actually old, and for more data collection comparisons. And so that's something that is kind of evolving the librarian field, especially in the sciences, is that aspect, and the availability to not just any university or any researcher in the United States, but it's more international. And so there's more international sharing of the library resources.
That's great. That's great.
That's very good.
So another question, as students, and we see some, I actually see some in the attendee who are going to be graduating next year. What advice would you give them as they start interviewing or trying to get internships in the job market right now? What advice? Oh, what was your process of getting a job? What do you think works?
Any of you could start to
I'll
like
start.
to answer.
Let your personality shine through in the internships. I've done some practice ones even recently at my job. I'm not looking to move, but we have a training office that does practice ones. And when they had the opportunity to do a virtual interview, I was like, well, I should practice that since this might be how we talk for a while. And they're like, we know you know your stuff, because I also know them pretty well. They're like, but you're almost too robotic now that you know your content. Let your personality shine through. So it was really good advice I got. Also, if you've done that practical hands-on experience that we've all talked about, definitely talk about that. Even as Emily said, it may feel like it's just kind of part of what you're doing as a Hartwick student. It's going to stick out. I think that's really what helped me get into grad school too, was that hands-on experience that I got with my senior thesis. So any sort of hands-on experience, internship, research that you've done, special project, make sure that you're comfortable talking about that and you're able to link it to the skills in the job posting that you're applying to, and just use those keywords and link it. I also love reviewing resumes. So if there's any students on the call that want like a second opinion on their resume, they can totally connect with me. I did that when I worked in Passage, and I still do it for my friends now. It's just a lot of fun, because it's great for me to learn about the person whose resume I'm reviewing, and then also really I like to ask those more probing questions of like, well, you kind of mentioned this, but it seems like you maybe have some more you really want to talk about.
Yeah, that's good advice. What about Emily?
Yeah, so I work a lot with the students now that are juniors, seniors, and about to graduate or about to finish their PhD programs. And one of the things that the story I like to tell them is that I didn't apply for a job at the US Geological Survey. I was recruited. And so one of the wonderful things about Hartwick was that we all received these, back when we got paper mail, it was just information about programs that we could submit our resumes to. And so I submitted my resume, I think it was in December, January, my senior year. I uploaded it and put where that I would live anywhere, what types of opportunities I was looking for, what my fun, I liked hiking, I liked doing field work, and I filled all of that out. And then that's when I received a call in September after I graduated, and they interviewed me for a job at the US Geological Survey to be a hydrologist, and they had reviewed everything that was in that document. And so I tell all students that I work with now that to get your resume or CV into a database, like I show when I worked at the US Geological Survey, I would show students what the Pathways program was, and then how to upload their resume to make it discoverable. And so I spend, usually like 30 to 90 minutes now walking through what they're looking for in that. And so that way, instead of, because I felt very stressed about applying for jobs, and it was a lot easier to be recruited to one. And that basically they recruited me, and then I stayed for almost 23 years. So it was a very useful tool to have that and have them review that.
Nicole, do you have anything to add?
I would probably say just to network. I know people told me that while I was at Hartwick, and I was like, oh yeah, networking is important, but I didn't really do it. And now that I'm out in the field, I'm like, oh my gosh, networking is literally everything. So, I mean, and now with COVID-19, you can still network. It does not limit you in any way. When I was looking for a job, I mean, while I was still at Oregon State University, I didn't think I was really going to get a job that I wanted. So I was networking every single day. I would, pull up my computer, research companies that were nearby in the Portland, Seattle area. And a lot of company websites have emails with people's names and their job descriptions, and so, or their phone number. And so I would just pick someone to call like every day And people love talking about themselves. So if you frame the call not as in like, oh, I want a job, are you hiring? You frame it more as in like, oh, hi, I'm going to be graduating in a year. Would love to learn more about your path. How did you get here? How do you like your company? And you'll be amazed by how much information you can get from that one, 15-minute phone call that could eventually turn into a job offer later on. So I would just say, do that.
Definitely very important. Yeah.
So Susan, I do see that Mike Doherty is on this call, and I kind of feel like we should bring him in so the students on the call can see his face and know that he is a great alum to connect to as well.
I think we should put him on the spot, right?
I'm calling you out,
Somebody
Mike.
else did it for me. Mike, are you there?
I don't know if he even has the capability to connect.
Oh,
but-
I do. Okay. Just because I'm a baby boomer and I've crossed over that 65-year-old threshold doesn't mean I'm not adaptable to 21st century technology. Thank you. And both of you, since both of you were in the Metrolink program with Nicole and Catherine, it was always a pleasure to bring you folks down to the Washington component, because there was also the New York City component, and before that, the Boston component. And when I talked to the other alumni that did this, they found that the students, in some cases, they realized this is really not what I want to do. They might find that from one of those shadows that they have, like, say, up in Boston. And then in New York and Washington, they find something that they do want to do. So I always like the Metrolink program and the new overnight program, because it does expose you to people. I mean, I took people through the Washington metro system, and we, had to navigate that. Okay, that's not a big deal in Oneonta, but it helps you learn about the different ways to get around in a big city that has mass transit, which is very important. Also, as you indicated, your independent studies, that's what Emily said, very, very important. I was very fortunate because the college bought Pine Lake while I was a student. Yeah. So I got to do 2 research projects out at Pine Lake, one on the upper tract looking at Escherichia coli going from a stream with just a forest through a pasture where there are cows pooping on it and into a marsh where you've got geese and ducks pooping in it. And that was my junior year. And then my senior year, I was measuring dissolved oxygens in the lake after it froze over and finding out that the dissolved oxygen at the bottom of the lake was being used up by bacteria, as they metabolize the detritus. And I'm working in the boiler room of the main lodge because the Robert Smith lab was not there. So I'm doing titrations in a boiler room. So you've got to be flexible in terms of what you're willing to do in order to show your employer, you can work outside the box, which worked for me when they deployed me off to Afghanistan and Pakistan and some other fun places during freedom, because then I was actually doing air pollution samples near a port in Ashwaba, Kuwait, and I was having to go down every day and change filters, but because of the force protection condition, myself and the guy that rode with me, or my driver, we both had to have our weapons. And then I had to have another vehicle, and they had to have both weapons with the driver and the passenger. I had to contact the entry control point when I left Camp Doha. I had to contact the entry control point when I arrived at the port. I mean, you just get to the point where, as I'm sure Nicole is finding out by going and doing a lot of field work, and as Catherine has done by writing permits, and you have to go and inspect the facilities, you just have to be very open to using the tools that are available to you.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Great advice. Great advice. We're kind of coming up on, do you have, Dr. Balogh-Brunstad, do you have any other questions before we kind of?
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about another thing and aspects. I mean, I got my education in a different country, it's a very different experience, how, you start from high school, go through college, and through your, career in STEM. And so you are all women in a STEM field. So what was your experiences? So did you experience anything which was something, injustices or biases or something which was hard for you to navigate just because you are a woman in this field? And so how did you experience, or how did you get overcome on that, if you had that? Emily, maybe we start with you.
So I had an interesting so I'm obviously blonde and I'm not what people expected when they were looking for information when I was a hydrologist. And so when I would walk into a room, especially if I was doing when I was in Rhode Island, I had to present at the Water Resources Board, Rhode Island Water Resources Board often. And, you know, a lot of people started to get the information across the state. And then they knew that it was a contact point at the USGS Water Resources Office to come in and get information for if they were drilling. And so I would have drill rig operators come into the office and they thought I was the secretary. And so I would stand there and there were 5 of us, you know, so somebody would come in, there were 5 of us just kind of standing around, and he would explain the information he was looking at or needed to look at at the USGS office. And he kept looking at I should preface that I was the girl, and there were 4 boys that I worked with. And so they thought that he kept telling, like, going up to my colleagues and saying, you know, this is what I need. And they were like, I'm not your person. She's the brains in the office. And he was so upset that I was, you know, I was shorter and blonde and I wasn't what they expected. And so he looked at me and left. And that was the first time I ever felt like, wow, he would rather not get where to drill the well than to talk to a female. Like, and that was just, and I tell that story to female students very often because I said, you just have to not worry about it because it's not, I didn't do anything wrong. And it's just that especially when you're working with drillers, it's just unexpected. At least it was at that time. It was 98, 99. And it was very uncomfortable, I guess. For them to talk to a woman, especially, I heard the story I heard later that, and then she was blonde. It's like, that just was weird. So.
Yeah, I get that a lot. Like a blonde, and you should be just a trophy wife or something like that.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
Right. Yeah.
You
What
know,
about you, Nicole and Catherine, since you are
was a hydrogeologist, and so she was often humping auger, you know, for these well drillers and logging in fact, she was very fortunate. She went to James Madison University and they have a farm that they'd bought, and she took a bunch of students out there, got her company to pay for the well drilling rig to come out. And so she showed them how to log soils as they came up through the well, which was really nice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what about you, Catherine and Nicole? Like, did you have any of those experiences? I mean, it's a little bit later than the late 90s. So is anything changed?
Yeah, I could definitely, I have a story related to Emily, but first I want to say women are usually underpaid in this area compared to men when you have the same exact job title. So for me, I wanted to make sure I was going to have a good offer when I was looking for jobs, and women usually don't negotiate going into jobs. It is very stressful, and it's just a weird situation to, you know, try and ask for more money when you're first just trying to get hired, especially for your first job. So I want to really say, like, definitely negotiate. Yeah, definitely do it. And don't be afraid to ask people when you're networking. Don't be afraid to ask people about what salary they might have had or what they know about the field, because it's really good to know those numbers so that you're not, you know, being hired and being paid less. Make sure you're compensated correctly. But that aside, yeah, well drillers. Yeah, they're interesting people. I am drilling a lot of wells, so I work with them a lot, like months and months with people. And it's an interesting situation because well drillers, they know everything about that drill rig. They know how to put in a well. They know their job really well. But then you have someone from the environmental field like me who's sent out there to observe them, supervise them, make sure they're, you know, drilling the well to the correct specifications. So it's a kind of a little like a power dynamic. I know nothing about operating a drill rig, but I know what specifications it needs to be. So I'm technically their supervisor on that one site. And yeah, I'm a really petite, small woman. I just got this job. So you do meet people who find that very odd when I'm the one that shows up at the site and I have to tell them what to do. But then again, you meet others who are just, will do everything that you say. So it's just learning to adjust to different environments. And I find I communicate differently on drill rigs than I would in the office. You just sort of have to get comfortable with the people you're working with, and be confident, and just remember, what you were sent out there because your company believed that you could do the job correctly. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you.
So I think I've been really lucky. I don't think I've had any issues with like blatant sexism. I had trouble with my graduate school advisor. Z thought that there could definitely be some cultural gender stuff there, but I think he just also had trouble with students that had a different learning style or really had a value for quality assurance, quality control. That's a whole other story, but it definitely helped teach me a lot of things that I value that I was able to bring into my job at EPA. And I think the struggles I had in grad school really helped me with my job at EPA. And the lab I was in at EPA, I had a male partner and a male boss, but they were both really great with listening to my ideas. So I think I've been really lucky in that sense. It's definitely something I'm aware of in my current field. I think we have a really good diversity in our office, but wastewater operation has been male dominated, and even permit writing has been not only male dominated, but engineer dominated. And so that's an area where I've been kind of very aware of and really trying to step up and prove that as a non-engineer and as a woman that I can get the concepts and that I can write just as good of a permit as the people who are traditionally in the field. But overall, luckily, I haven't had to deal with too much outright sexism.
That's good. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I think everybody has kind of provided some amazing advice today this afternoon already. And I think you made an advocacy for more women entering field work, and that's needed, as well as diversity probably. But I do like to end this session because we are over the time already, because you guys are so great. I love asking if you can have one sentence of advice to our students as they kind of think about their future careers. What advice would you give them? And let's start with, I'm going to actually start with Mike. Mike, let's start with you.
I probably agree that going and having internships is really one of the things that you can do. And with the overnight program, shadowing somebody that's already in the field, it's really, really important to do that. I didn't do that. I didn't even get down to San Salvador with the biology program when it first started. I just stayed at Hartwick for all 4 years. But if I had it to do over again, yes, I would have gone out and done some field work or worked for DEC, as a summer intern or something like that.
Great, thank you. How about you, Catherine?
In one sentence, I would say, I'd kind of reiterate what I said before: be flexible and be open to opportunities. Because I think that trying something new, like Mike said, even just with the shadowing, it can either show you that there's a new passion that you have or something you definitely want to avoid. So just try everything. Anything that seems like it might be appealing, check it out.
Great, great. Nicole, I'm going to put you on the spot next.
I'll just sort of mirror what Michael said, that don't let any opportunity pass you by. If you see an internship or classes to take, just do it, because it'll make your resume look a lot better, and you'll be able to communicate more effectively in your interviews.
Great. And finally, but not least, Emily, what are your thoughts? What's your advice?
Well, as a chemistry, geosciences, and environmental studies librarian, I would advocate find the subject librarian either at Hartwick or at another institution like where I work, and just contact one of us and say, I'm interested in going into this field. What library materials can you help me with? And what's the publishing trends? Because I think that gives you or any students that information of where everything is being published, from societies to the corporate or company information. And it's, I mean, I can help someone so quickly find all the information that they would need for the background of their job opportunities.
Well, that's a great way to end it, because again, I want to reiterate, students, you need to contact these people. They have your best interest in heart and they're going to help you. So if you're interested in contacting any one of these individuals, please email me at jones3@hartwick.edu, jones3. I am so excited. This afternoon has been a great talk. You've given so much good advice, even food for thought for myself as well. So I appreciate it. And Michael, thank you for joining us. That was a lot of fun. Dr. Balogh-Brunstad, really, I can't thank you enough for hosting this afternoon.